So I'll start off just by introducing myself and the project in outline, and then we'll go into a bit more depth. So the Three Pillars project is principally using a combination of military leadership and rugby-based courses to offer rehabilitation, engage principally young people who often struggle with issues of violence. Our principal goal is rehabilitation, but also to aid reintegration back into society by offering positive role models through our courses. I myself, I left the army over the past year. I was in the Royal Tank Regiment for 8 years, served in Afghanistan twice, and of course numerous exercises as well along with that. In terms of my academic background, I read politics at Nottingham, and I've just finished an MRes at Exeter University in Strategy and Security, which I'll go into a little more detail later, because actually as I was thinking for this talk, I realised how actually relevant my previous research has become to the course itself. In terms of sport, I'm a bit of a volunteer, I suppose, in London. That probably drives my interest in community issues, particularly volunteering around rugby delivery for state schoolboys and people in the community. Thanks.
So I'm Rebecca Bex. My background is I'm practicing criminal and commercial barrister, but I have a particular interest in prison policy, both in terms of the theory and practical side of things. And that's led to my involvement in a number of prison-based initiatives, including working in prisons in Kingston and Jamaica. I was fortunate to study here at Cambridge as my undergraduate, and I was taught by Professor Gelthorpe, which was brilliant, and it's really great to be back here today. So thank you so much to Professor Gelthorpe and also to Jane for organising today. Just hand back over to Mike to talk about how the project was founded.
So how did I get started? It's really fantastic to hear such an interest in youth justice, and I think certainly that, and with probation and reintegration into society, is particularly where we're aiming. Last summer I was engaged as a volunteer rugby coach in Feltham Young Offenders Institute for 2 weeks, working with someone else, and it became, and I'm sure this is something that people who've been working in prisons for years are all too aware of, it became immediately apparent to me how effective the use of sport was, and particularly rugby, at engaging young boys between 15 and 18. I think what particularly struck me was just how similar these 16, 17-year-old boys who were in for quite serious offences, how similar they were to many of the 18, 19-year-old men who I've seen do amazing, spectacular things in Afghanistan, how similar they were. Socially, economically, probably from very similar groups. In terms of educational attainment, probably again very similar. The divergence comes that the guys I was working with were, had been incarcerated, and the lads who I served with in Afghanistan had joined the army and had found that as their route out, so to speak. There's one particular conversation with a 16-year-old boy who was on remand for carriage of an offensive weapon, a string of numerous offences beforehand. And actually, I remember, this is a boy who wouldn't really engage properly with anyone. I remember just the positive look in his eye and the admiration when we started to talk about my real life experiences in the army, and him starting to ask questions about that. So it's by no means do I see the solution as let's get everyone in young offenders institutes or the prison to join the army, but what I do think it offers, or my experience offers, is the ability to engage people and understand where they come from, because they're so similar to the people I've worked with in the army for the past 8 years. So really building on that realisation, integrating it in with rugby and sports-based courses has really been a positive step going forward over the past year. I had a couple of other internships. I worked for an MP briefly, the former Shadow Youth Justice Minister, Dan Jarvis, and had an internship at a bank whilst developing this project, and actually got to the end of the internship at the bank. Well, actually, no, I got to the first day of the internship at the bank, and I realised that that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something meaningful and deliver change using the skills and experience I have. So that was a few months ago, and we've been developing since then. I was fortunate about 3 months ago to be introduced to a really fantastic young barrister who's got a real interest in social policy and particularly in improving standards of rehabilitation and within prison specifically. So Bex came on board 3 months ago, and really we've just been keeping up with the momentum that we're gathering since then.
Yeah, I think when Mike and I first met, it became immediately clear that we had a shared appreciation both for the need for this sort of programme, but also a shared vision as to how to implement it. Just to speak briefly about the need, obviously we're all sort of aware of the statistics out there in terms of prison population, staff shortages, budget cuts, and also the growing number of violent incidents, gang behaviour, drugs, mental health, self-harm, and all these factors create a reality where actually prison life is not conducive to affecting personal change and positive change in individuals. And what we're trying to do through this is actually something a little bit different, something a little bit innovative, to try to help to create that positive, sustainable change. So there are sort of, I suppose, 5 overarching concepts or principles that we try to stick to. The first is really what we call mentoring by stealth. So we market this as it's a rugby coaching course, and we do focus on the rugby and the sport side of things. But actually, that's really with a view to facilitating emotional engagement and to opening up pathways to be able to have the conversations about the big life issues and topics. Second concept is about engagement, and it's actually engaging those people who wouldn't ordinarily engage in this sort of project. So maybe because they're not offered it, because their behaviour records are not good enough, or because they're just not interested. So actually by marketing it as rugby coaching and military leadership, that actually makes it a little bit more palatable to those people. Thirdly, we are about positive intervention rather than negative intervention. And we'll have seen, because of all the increasing violent incidents in prisons, actually there's a real, the response to that seems to be quite security and risk driven, understandably to some extent, but also that seems to perpetuate the underlying issues. And what we want to do by using positive intervention is actually to give a sense of empowerment, to encourage the individual on the course to reconnect with their identities, their individuality, and to give them the skills to affect the personal change themselves. And that feeds into the fourth concept, which is really reversing the limiting by labelling. What I mean by that is we don't say this is a violence reduction course, because actually that's already labelling people as violent, problematic people. And actually what we want to say is we're concentrating on the positive things that you have, and your potential to contribute positively to society, to your family, to the people around you. And we think that that's actually a real shift from what they might be experiencing on a day-to-day basis within the prison regime. The last concept is sustainability. It's no good us coming in with a 6-week course and then disappearing and saying, okay, well, that's it. Actually, what we want to do is foster sort of long-term support. Mike will talk a little bit more about that and how we do it, but it's really establishing links with other organisations who can offer the tailored one-on-one mentoring whilst we also support in the background. But also bringing in the idea of peer mentoring, so using past course graduates on the next courses to establish role models within each prison. And we're really working on that at the moment to just try to create, as I say, a sustainable model. I'll just pass over to Mike to talk a little bit more about the detail of the course.
Yeah, I think before I specifically talk about the theory of change, I think it's really important to note that we're not trying to supplant the existing prison officer system. We've come across some really fantastic, particularly PEIs who we work with, PE instructors, and a big part of the course is about improving relationships with staff, and actually because we're non-uniformed staff, we can operate in slightly grey areas. I would also suggest that I think Bex being a barrister and myself having come from the army, we can see we can operate in the grey areas, but we can also very much see the struggles that prison officers are dealing with day to day, especially with reducing staff numbers, increasing sentences, increasing levels of violence. So what we're really trying to bring something complementary to the existing prison service, and by no means trying to undermine what's already there. I think what's central to that as part of the theory of change is that I think we're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of, I would have said prison reform 2 or 3 months ago, but obviously there's changes going on at the moment. But we're certainly in a crossroads in terms of how we meet effective rehabilitation. There's far more priority being given to academic work. It's better understanding statistically of what works and what doesn't work. And I think what's central to my belief is that community has to have a greater engagement and involvement with prison system. So if you want offenders to be employed when they come out of prison, actually there needs to be a reduction of the stigma around going to prison, being a prisoner or an ex-offender. So our theory of change specifically. So the 3 pillars. If you look around for a number of societies and cultures, there's kind of a tripartite reference to the soul or holistic approaches. So if you think earth, wind and fire, mind, body and soul, religiously the Father, Son and the Holy Ghost, actually these things all apply to your holistic self. In the army we have the moral, conceptual and the physical component. So the moral component being your ethos and your values, the physical component being that of security, but also the army sense of fitness, and the conceptual component being intellectualism or education. So for us, our 3 pillars are education, ethos, and exercise. So we use exercise to engage young people that we're working with, or young men. Through engaging them, we can better encourage them to aspire to education, and part of running a rugby course is we start to develop a quite strong ethos amongst the players. There's an ethos of team, of leadership, getting young men who have been sentenced to potentially 5-6 years, or telling them that they're leaders within a group in a positive setting actually starts to spin the narrative. And a big part of our theory of change is, as Beck said, using positivity. So really trying to spin that narrative that the negative societal narrative that we place on people by putting them in prison, spin that and to try and implant positive factors onto them. So as I mentioned earlier, I did an MRes on it's a study into encouraging indigenous forces to adhere to international law, specifically related to my experience in Afghanistan. I was a mentor in a remote location to 100 Afghan soldiers, and they're culturally incredibly different to us, and previously had no concept of adherence to international law, so the laws of armed conflict. So how does that relate to what we're doing in the prison system? I would say that reducing crime and attacking crime is very similar to counterinsurgency. All the theories are the same, and I found that with mentoring someone who wasn't adhering to or wouldn't naturally adhere to international law, actually the skills you need, that of coercion rather than strict imposition of values, it was always far more effective. If you suggest something to someone, I found in Afghanistan particularly, if you suggest something to someone, they're more likely to take up on it long term than if you rigorously tell them. And I think it's a big part into our theory of change that goes into the choice to take up a new set of values, a new ethos, rather than the imposition of a set of values and ethos. As I said, team is really crucial to that. As part of the course, we run a 6-week course, 4 hours twice a week, so 8 hours a week. And it starts off with really intense, quite almost confrontational levels of rugby. Guys, most of whom have never played rugby before. And we use that engagement and really build it up along the line to have increasingly more open conversations about the self, people's aspirations, their goals, where they are, how they're feeling within the system. We find that rugby is particularly good because it can release frustration, a lot of pent-up aggression, increasingly with the reduction in staff numbers, people spending more and more time in their cells, which is our experience on the ground in the prisons that we've been working in. And then finally, it's a new skill. You never underestimate the value of learning something completely new, which I'm sure you'll all have experienced over many years of experience. So, as Beck said, we really try to mentor by stealth through the course and switch those narratives. One of them being running a first aid course which is something that's done in a number of estates already. But if you teach someone who has been labelled an aggressive offender, a violent offender, actually teach them to be a first aider, you're switching the label, you're turning the label upside down of who they are, what they are as a person, and they start to re-question it. I'll wrap up on how we conduct things and let Bex carry on with our results from our pilot study. But I would just say we're increasingly focused on providing new skill sets to help people to be sustainable, and we're finding that going forward is going to be central to our theory of change.
So we ran a pilot project in Wandsworth over, it was actually a 7-week rather than 6-week period. We had 14 participants on that. And over that time, as Mike said, we had the physical side with the rugby. We had each session we would have also a group discussion, increasing on life values and goals. Each participant completed an action plan, which was really about distilling what they wanted from life and putting together their goals, their values, and also how they're going to achieve them, and breaking that down into much smaller steps to make it something that they were actually empowered to do rather than something that was quite sort of conceptual only. And the whole course culminated with an outside team coming in, an outside rugby team coming in to play the participants, and actually they managed to win both of their matches, which was great. But it was just the atmosphere that was created from that was fantastic. We were next to an exercise yard, so a lot of the other inmates were able to see what was going on and really be involved as supporters. And actually there were points where it felt like we weren't actually in a prison, and the local radio station was out and commentating on it. So it was a real sort of, not quite the whole prison, but it was a real sort of prison event. And we had great feedback from the guys who came in, the outside team, in terms of breaking down the barriers of what their perception of prison and prisoners and offenders was, and actually it really spoke to them that they were normal people. And you think, well, yes, that's it. And I think that's a really powerful part of the pilot and of what we wanted to do with future courses. Because it was a pilot, we were gathering a lot of feedback. We really want to work out how to improve the course. You'll see there's on the handout, there are a few quotations from feedback forms, and actually we were struck by the poignancy of some of the things that participants said, and the impact really stretched beyond what we thought it might. I think for all of our participants, just in terms of general feedback, all participants said that it had a positive impact on their physical well-being, their emotional well-being whilst in prison, their relationships with family and friends, their relationships with other inmates, and also on their self-confidence. Just to tell you about a specific example, one of our participants, he was a 24-year-old who was on his 3rd custodial sentence. He was serving 2.5 years, due to be released this December. And when he first started, he was really a natural sportsman, brilliantly naturally skilled in rugby, although had never played before, but was really not interested in the sort of more emotional group discussions, was not engaging, just wanted to play rugby. And it's worth pointing out that in all of his time in prisons, he had never completed one course. This was the first course he'd actually been on. And there was a real turning point in one of the group discussions where he suddenly piped up we were talking about values and goals and potential hurdles to reaching those goals. And he said, I think actually I'm quite impatient and maybe I need to work on that. And it sounds like a very small thing, but actually in the context of his life and the fact that he'd never really been able to be vulnerable in that situation, let alone with 14 other inmates that he'd only known for sort of 5 weeks, that was a real, it was a real turning point for him. And from there we were able to have lots of one-on-one conversations with him, talking about his life and some of the issues that underlie his offending behaviour. And from there we've now been able to put him in touch with specific one-on-one tailored mentoring programs, one that operates in Wandsworth called Trailblazers, and also Switchback, which are both quite intensive one-on-one mentoring that will be able to support him in the last 3 months of his sentence, but then also after release. And in the background we are also keeping in contact with him to offer support. And I think without our program there, he is someone who is unlikely to have engaged in anything like that, and unlikely to have really kind of reached out and seen his potential to change and what maybe needed to change in his life. So I think that's something that sort of speaks to maybe the long-term sustainability of this. And other participants have been very keen to re-engage as peer mentors. So on the next course, as I was saying, come back and assist and continue their own development, but also for those who are going on to Cat D prisons, potentially to come and actually be employed with us as well. So we're quite ambitious in terms of our plans at this point, but we're really keen to keep that sustainability as a kind of a focus for us, to make sure that the work we do on the courses is actually put to good use.
So I think the future for us, we'll be re-engaging with Wandsworth after Christmas and running a subsequent course. We're about to be commissioned by Wormwood Scrubs they've specifically asked for violence reduction and gang intervention programs. So we're looking to establish a series of courses with them. And we're also in talks with another charity with regards to delivering in Feltham, which I think once we get to the point where we're delivering in those three, then we'll really start to consolidate on what our offering is. But I do kind of introspectively, I'm standing here listening to what we're talking about, and as a prison officer or someone who's working in the justice system, I suspect you're probably asking yourself, what do you really offer that's that different? How is that any different to what a PEI offers or some of the existing charities that already offer? Well, firstly, I would say the more the merrier. The more high quality people that you can get to engage with in the justice system and to engage in rehabilitation, then that's not to be sniffed at. I think probably Rebecca and myself are particularly focused on collaboration and really drawing towards the extensive network that exists around the criminal justice system, but also thinking creatively. So one of our collaborative partners is going to be is already the Invictus Games. And we've got an athlete from the Invictus Games who won the gold medal in the tennis, wheelchair tennis last summer. He's delivering sessions on overcoming adversity. And actually, when you're a 19-year-old boy who feels like you've had a pretty hard run at life, and you're faced with someone who it's coming at it from a slightly different angle, it's quite an innovative and creative way of looking at it. So I think that our creativity and our ability to collaborate is a further point. And then finally, I think for the future, something that we're particularly interested in is political change and political awareness around these issues. For there to be genuine change and reformation of the existing prison system, there has to be a wide-sweeping political acknowledgement that it needs to take place. Charities are only allowed to advocate so much as charities. I think as a community interest company, we have a little more freedom to lobby for change. But I think also something that we notice with some groups is there can at times be a view to just criticise what goes on. So to criticise and blame prison officers for what's going on the landings, to criticise NONs for lack of resources, to criticise government for not putting change into effect. Actually, what we're trying to say is we're a pair of people who are positively engaged with transformation of the justice system, and we believe we can genuinely add something positive, and it's about working collaboratively with the existing charities and groups that are there, but also, and more importantly, with the prison officers, PEIs, governors and NONs to create more creative and more developed approaches to reducing reoffending.